We're going to begin this morning with one of the Republican candidates' most popular surrogates, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, who has campaigned, I'm told, Senator, in more than 30 states.
I've been racking up some frequent flyer miles,
Absolutely.
That's for sure.
You know, you had a somewhat surprising comment the other day. You said, and this is your quote, the Republican brand sucks. That's a pretty unusual rallying cry in an election year. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know what I meant by that is that if I were to go into a college campus today and I were to talk to a young person and say, hey, you want to be part of the Republican Party? Or let's say I go and talk to a young African-American male or woman, you want to be part of the Republican Party? The initial perception of our brand is, Like, for example, I had a meeting with some conservative African-Americans recently, and I said, let's try to get something moving nationally. And they said, well, yeah, but we may not want to put the word Republican in it. So that means essentially our brand is broken. I don't think what we stand for is bad. I believe in what the Republican Party values. But we have a wall or a barrier between us and African-American voters. So I spent the last year trying to break down some of that wall and say, look, maybe what the Democrats have been doing for you, or maybe you're being taken for granted, maybe it's not working. Maybe we could look at some of these Republican proposals for poverty, for long-term unemployment.
Well, you know, you say that, but yet when you look at state after state that's trying to tighten these voter laws and, you know, say people have to show ID and all that kind of stuff, it's generally the Republicans who are pushing that. What can you really offer African-American voters?
Well, what I've said is I want more people to vote, not less. Harry Reid and I have a bill together to actually restore voting rights. The number one impediment to voting in our country right now is having a previous felony conviction. So I have a good friend of mine, his brother 30 years ago grew marijuana plants, still can't vote in Kentucky, and when he applies for a job, he has to check a box saying he was a convicted felon. I think nonviolent felonies from your youth and where you didn't hurt anybody but yourself, for goodness sakes, you ought to get your right to vote back. So I spent a lot of time talking about this. I have a bill with Harry Reid to restore voting
Well, what
rights.
about this business about tightening up the voter ID laws?
I think,
should they be tighter? Should they have to show all this identification?
Well, I have mixed feelings. I mean, when I go in a government building or if I want to meet Eric Holder, I got to show my driver's license. So I'm not really opposed to it. I am opposed to it as a campaign theme. If Republicans, if you want to get African-American vote, they think that this is suppression somehow and it's a terrible thing. But I think if you can get beyond that to say, you know what, but I also really think that we should restore the voting rights of those who had a previous conviction, that's where the real voting problem is. I'm not against early voting. I grew up in Texas. We voted early for a month or two before elections for probably 20 years, and Texas is still a Republican state. But it's perception. The Republicans have to get beyond this perception that they don't want African Americans to vote. And I don't think it's true. I'm not saying it's true. But by being for all these things, it reinforces a stereotype that we need to break down.
Is this election a referendum on Barack Obama?
Without question. And even he admitted that his policies will be on the ballot even though he isn't. And it's such a referendum on him that, you know, in my state, the Democrat candidate won't even admit she voted for him for presidency. And so I think really it is. And I think ultimately the wind's blowing against him. People are unhappy with his leadership or lack of leadership in the country. So I think you're going to see, I think the 10 seats that you say are close, you could see all 10 go Republican. I mean, really, you could see a wave here at the end. And I think people are sensing this, those who don't even want to admit that they voted for him for president.
Let's say the Republicans do take control of the Senate. Is it enough for them to say we're not Barack Obama, or are they going to have to come up with some sort of an agenda?
No, I think we immediately should start passing bills. The House passed 400 bills. They've all languished. Of the 400 bills they passed, about 50 of them are Democrat bills. I have a bill with Harry Reid I'd like to pass. But the number one thing I want to pass in January is there's $2 trillion worth of American profit overseas. I want to invite that and encourage that money to come home to create American jobs. We could have a stimulus in January. Barbara Boxer agrees with me on this. This is a bipartisan bill. People on the right and the left invite that corporate money. Google, Apple, Caterpillar, all these great companies have money overseas. They could bring it home and stimulate our economy. We could have a boom like we haven't seen in years, but we just have to vote on the issue. I say vote on it in January as one of our first things.
Do you think that the gridlock will end? Because what I keep hearing people say, look, it really doesn't make any difference if Republicans control the Senate by 1 or 2 votes. Nothing's going to change. The gridlock will still be in place.
You know, I take Senator McConnell at his word. As leader, he's going to allow Democrat amendments, and we're going to come forward and we're going to vote on things, and we will put on the president's desk bills. I'd like to put every appropriation bill. I'd like to have 12 different appropriation bills like we historically did. Let's put every one of them on his desk and see if he'll sign them. Then it's up to him.
Tell me a couple of things that Republicans and Democrats could work together on.
One of the things I've talked to the president about is criminal justice reform. This means extending back the right to vote for people who made youthful, nonviolent mistakes, expunging their records, trying to make it easier for them to find employment, shortening, like, I think putting somebody in jail for 10 years for possession of marijuana or sale of marijuana is ridiculous. Some people are in jail for life. So I've called the president and I've told him I agree with commuting some of these sentences, lessening some of these sentences, treating it more as a health issue. So I think people's opinions on criminal justice for nonviolent drug crimes has changed. That's something we could do together.